people who are going through this stage of individuating, they look at the church that they've grown up in and they see no models of what does it look like to be a deconstructing person in community with these people. There's no example. And without an example of it, they assume that they have to leave. The first time I shared my whole story with my spiritual director, she started referring to God in my context. She said, God is the hound of heaven. And she said, wherever you went, wherever you ran off to, when you would kind of go into these mysteries and questions that you would ask and doubts and those kind of things, the hound of heaven would still track you down. And I love that image. There's a long history of people who are going through exactly what you're going through, and it has been sheltered and hidden from people because it's uncomfortable. You're not alone now. You're not alone historically. You're not alone in orthodoxy.
Welcome to The Light in All, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
As you know, the plan here is to discuss the light in all and how that fits into your story, your life story. And however, I hold that agenda loosely, so we'll just follow the light as we go here. But before we jump right into that topic, I have a get to know you question, but you're going to have to play pretend, okay, in this. So just like when we were kids, I guess. To show our appreciation for you being on the podcast here today, we are giving you an all-expense paid trip to anywhere in the world. Where do you want to go?
Well, I think that's easy.
Is it?
Yeah,
Good.
I'd go to Ireland.
Really? Why is that?
Well, so I served in the Celtic Church for a while as a priest and a bishop. And I love the Celtic people. I love the connection to nature and their love of simplicity, and it would be wonderful to visit what they call thin places. So, if you're not familiar with the term, thin places are those places where the boundary between heaven and earth are so thin that you can feel the presence there.
Oh, wow.
And so for them, like many of the way that they decided how to build a church or a building, some religious space of some kind was always, it was first and foremost a thin place. And so you can visit these sacred places there and
but you haven't been there before?
That have been saturated. No, I've never been.
How did you get
my grandmother was from Ireland.
Oh, okay. How did you get connected with them then?
So there was a period of time when I was looking for a church to belong to, and there was this Celtic church around the corner from where I happened to live at the time. I was in the Appalachian Mountains, which is kind of a common, for the Celtic church that was planted in America. While it kind of exists all over, there's more of it in the Appalachian Mountains because that felt like home. It feels like Scotland and Ireland. And so I lived there and had one around the corner, and it was this little small building that I walked into one morning, and I hated it. It was awful. Like everybody had robes on, and I had not come from a tradition where that made sense to me. And when I sat down, there's this book like this thick of like the priest says this, and then you say this, and it was this back and forth call liturgy. It was awful. But at the end of it, they invite me out to Denny's, and I decided to go for some reason. And I watched this, I want to call it a debate, but it wasn't really a debate between, one of the abbots or the abbot and the bishop. And, they were clearly on different theological spectrums, and the abbot was saying things that like probably would verge on heresy from anything I had previously heard. And I loved that, they still clearly loved each other. They ended the argument in good faith and like hugged and departed. And it was like, if this heretic abbot can be here, maybe I can be here too.
Okay.
And so I found a place of theological hospitality that I really loved, and stayed with them until our particular group had to shut down several years ago.
Okay.
We had just dwindled, um, and
I
so
I love
yeah,
that term, theological hospitality.
generous orthodoxy is another one I use
Uh,
sometimes for
oh,
that.
okay. Yeah, great. Yeah. So we got a little bit of your story. It sounds like it's varied. You know, it
Yeah,
wasn't a
that's
straight
accurate.
path. I can already sense that.
That's accurate.
But why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about how this concept, and I hesitate to use the word concept, but this realization that the light is in all people, how does that fit with your life story as you grew up and jobs and uh, however it fits? We'll just start
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I think it has shown up in many places in life, but the one that stands out the strongest, where it was kind of like an aha moment, maybe of like, oh, like this is everybody kind of has this.
Mhm.
I worked in wilderness therapy for a little while. This was a program where, in particular, I worked with a group of kids who had kind of addiction in their background. So they were struggling with some sort of addiction, and it was quite expensive. So by the time that they came to us, this was not a minor intervention. This was a
Okay.
major intervention.
These kids really
People
needed help.
had to put their homes on the line for it. Like it was brutally expensive.
Mm.
Um, but they would come out there and we would teach them like wilderness skills. And we would use that as a metaphor. Like if you're teaching them how to build a trap or something, the traps are going to fall down over and over again as you're learning how to make them work well. And
Mhm.
that creates frustration. And then we could use that frustration in that moment to talk about what do you normally do when you're frustrated. In the case of those with kind of addiction in their past, often it was to use. And so we would kind of use that as a leverage point to kind of talk through some of those issues.
Hmm.
It was good work. I really loved it. It was hard on your body, emotionally laboring.
How
Anyway,
old were you there?
I started probably around 26, 27.
Had you been in
Um,
therapy work before that? Or
no, I was a pastor before that
oh,
and
okay.
was frustrated that so I worked as a family pastor just before that. And, um, and I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I had parents coming to me saying, my kid's talking about suicide. What do I do?
Mm,
And I was like, "I don't know, I'm a kid, like,
yeah.
I don't know what to do with that." And so it actually motivated me to work in a therapeutic setting, and I
Okay.
spent, a decent portion of my career in those kind of settings learning what do you do when that kind of thing
Yeah.
happens.
Sorry to interrupt there. Go ahead with your
No, that's alright, and so, while I was working in wilderness therapy, um, you had this debrief at the end of the shift where you would talk with the team, and then you would talk with the therapist, and then you would talk with your supervisor, and you're just like processing because you worked week on week off, so you're not processing a day, you're
mm,
gone in the woods for a week.
wow.
And so you're processing that week with all of these people so that when you go home that you leave all this stuff away. And for growth too, like how do you improve?
Yeah.
And so there was pretty early on, when I was in the lead position. So once I had kind of grown a little bit, and now I'm the person in charge of the group that's out in the woods. I encountered this kid who, uh, I mean, teenage girl who just she was so obnoxious, like wouldn't listen to anything that we would do, like was creating dangerous situations for the group. Really hard to manage, and
Pushed
um,
every button, it sounds like.
pushed every button. And my supervisor, when he was debriefing with me, um, is like, I think he got kind of tired of me complaining because I used my session with him to vent. I'm talking
Mm,
strategy with a therapist, with the supervisor, I'm venting. And he said, "Well, what's her positive intention?" And I gave him some lame excuse, I'm sure. I don't remember what I said, but I'm sure it was something like, she just wants attention, or like the kind of normal things that we assume is what's behind what somebody does when they're
yeah.
pushing our buttons. And he just shook his head and he's like, "No, no, that's not it. Come back to me when you know." And he left and he walked away. He wouldn't talk to me. I tried to talk to him a couple more times, he wouldn't. He would have nothing to do with me until I could come up with a positive intention. And I don't remember what I finally did find. I think it was kind of a lame excuse. I learned later to dive deeper into those things, but I think he finally gave me a pass that I had tried enough.
Okay.
And then he would engage in conversation again with me. But it was a real gift because he pushed me to think past those default answers and to realize, like, even something like hitting somebody in the face, this is not what this girl was doing, but it's a good example for what I mean by positive intention. If you punch somebody in the face, we have a tendency to not think of that. There's no positive intention there, right?
Right.
But there is, because you could be like a youth could be, for instance, trying to teach the other person a lesson. Maybe it's really important for them to know this thing, and so they're pushing that, they're teaching that lesson.
They're
It could
making
be
their point.
yeah, it could be setting a boundary. These are awful ways to do it, don't get me wrong, it's
Yeah.
still a bad behavior, but behind it is a healthy intention, and if we can look for the healthy intention, then we can learn to help. I later on in life, I ended up working as a social worker, and my particular, focus was on, foster homes that were about to disrupt, and my job was to go in and help them work through, okay, you have this kid who's doing these awful behaviors. And I would always start with, what's the positive intention? Let's work through it. Because if we could find that, then we can help them meet that need in some other way.
Would people understand that question, or would they kinda say, "I'm not sure what you're looking for," or how would they react?
The first answer was almost always either I don't know what you're looking for, or it was those kind of uh, to get attention
Yeah,
answers, which is never, it's not that that's never the case, that can happen.
sure.
But it's less often than we think it is that the
Mhm.
reason is that. And so I'd help them get there, telling stories, sharing from my background, my information. We would brainstorm some things. We would look at the patterns of the behaviors and start to dissect it a little to say, is there a need behind all of these when we look at them together? And so it was a process. It wasn't quick and easy, just what's the positive intention, but it was the starting question. It's the
Yeah,
starting point. And that process just helped me to see that there's light in everybody. And so then as I experienced that, when I went back to kind of religious fears as my main work, um, the theology around that started to build differently,
okay.
and then I land with the Quakers at some point because of their uh, because of the way that they look at the light within.
Yeah, interesting. So, first, it was more on a secular basis that you thought something positive, you had to realize that something positive was coming from that individual.
Yeah. There was also an early rejection from me, although I'll admit I hid it a bit to the you know, kind of Calvinist thought in the theology. So I mentioned I was a pastor before I worked in wilderness
Yeah.
therapy. And in many of those spaces that I was a pastor at that point, it was, I worked at a Pentecostal church once. I worked at a vineyard. Vineyard felt kind of home.
Mhm.
Worked for a Christian Missionary Alliance. It was kind of a denominational mutt in that sense. But
Mhm.
all of those kind of Calvinistic thought is kind of a norm, and what I am really pointing out by saying Calvinistic thought is, there's this idea of total depravity. Humans
Yes.
are evil, awful, terrible, sinful creatures with no redeemable quality whatsoever, and it's only by the grace of God that we can be saved. This is kind of the push there, and there was an early rejection from me for that. That didn't seem right
Didn't set right.
theologically. But I didn't find an outlet. I just kind of thought I was an outlier, so I kinda kept that inside and was like, "Well, if if I'm gonna be in the church, I guess I need to just stuff that one."
Yeah.
It was later I discovered, first in the Celtic church and the theology of the original blessing, that there's an ancient rejection of that theology, that goes back before Calvin lived, and then in the Quakers, I found the same thing.
Tell us a little more about that Celtic perspective.
Yeah. So in in that Calvinistic way of thinking, there's this focus on original sin. The idea is that Adam and Eve sinned, and then that sin was inherited by their kids, and so they were born sinful. That's kind of that idea
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I've even heard it where, your kid cries and he throws tantrums and
Yeah. And so in Celtic theology, there's instead this focus on original blessing. There's zero rejection of the idea that your parents sinned and that has affected you
yes.
100%. Like if I grew up in an alcoholic household, my mother was an alcoholic, and being in that setting 100% affected me.
Yes.
Um, but but that doesn't mean that at my root, at my core, the total depravity is this jump that's kind of added to. So the Celts would agree with the idea that, yeah, like we are totally affected by the fallen world that we live in, but we were born creations of God. We were originally blessed with the imago Dei, the image of God. And we know that that's not physical because we all look so different, and yet we all somehow are the image of God. So what is the image of God? It's something more. It's something inside. It's something that we bear. It's the original blessing, the Celts would say. And so they highlight that theologically more than they do the original sin, to talk about how each person is a creation of God. And that theology is called original blessing. Matthew Fox wrote a book called Original Blessing. It's a good book. He
Mhm.
spent some time with some Celts before he wrote it, and was kind of absorbing some of that theology.
Okay.
Um,
And,
yeah,
um, Matthew Fox relation to George Fox with the Quaker or not?
I don't think they're connected at all.
Okay.
Um, it
I
yeah, there's at
okay.
least no acknowledged connection, but maybe
Okay.
if you traced his family roots back, maybe there is. That would be
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, because it's kinda maybe I'm not you correct me here. It's kinda like they were saying the same thing, but using different words than what we hear from George Fox in Quakerism.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they're born in kind of the same places, which I think is important. That
Hmm.
George Fox was in an area that would have been influenced by the Celts, but had been kind of absorbed into the Roman and Anglican churches, and so had started to adopt those ways. And next thing you know, George Fox is saying, "Well, wait a minute." For instance, he's probably sitting in the places that we call thin places because he's in the Celtic lands,
Mhm.
and he's encountering the Spirit of God in these thin places and saying, "Well, wait a minute. I think that there's this light within each of us." When I started looking for a church, when I knew that the Celtic church, that our particular group was shutting our doors, and started looking for a place, I ended up torn between the Episcopals and the Quakers for a little while because they both kind of have their roots in the same place as the Celtic Church.
Okay.
Um, very different in the way that they practice, very high liturgy in the Episcopalians, and almost no liturgy among the Quakers.
Right.
And it really turned into just the that appreciation of the light within for the
Yeah.
Quakers that drew me there.
I'm pretty new to Quakerism myself, and I come from a more fundamental background, the Calvinistic perspective, and it's fascinating for me to hear you saying, and correct me again if I'm wrong here, that maybe the primary driving force behind George Fox, who is the founder of Quakerism, uh, was kind of this rejection of total depravity. Is that true or not?
I don't know if that's uh I don't know if that's the only thing that he was rejecting. It
Mhm.
it does seem to me like that's a piece of what he was rejecting. There
Right.
was also kind of the authority structures. So, the Celtic lands, I learned this because I'd mentioned how the liturgy at first in the Celtic church I really struggled with, the big book and the robes and all of that. And at our synods, it was like that. When we would all gather, it was very high liturgical. Um, but there was this freedom among the Celts because it if you were trying to mimic the Celtic tradition, you were it really depended on when. Like, when were you looking to mimic it? Because if you were looking at when it was originally founded, at the earliest Celtic church history that we know and have, it was very informal. It was less about a church building and more about the prayer that you say when you milk the cow, the prayer that you say when you light the fire. They had these little poetic prayers that kind of went with each of these daily tasks that was kind of a rhythm. And when missionaries would come to the area, they were all kind of throwing up their hands and saying they would send letters back to the bishops and say, you know, hey, we're trying to talk to these Celts, but they have no interest in coming to the church. They're just a bunch of heathens. And then Patrick gets sent there, St. Patrick. And he, instead of being frustrated that nobody was coming to the church building, started to go visit them in their homes. And he was like, well, wait a minute. Like, they're already praying to God, to the same God. Like, I'm listening to them describe their God,
Mhm.
and it's our God. And it turns out that there was actually a coming of Christianity to the Celtic lands before those first Roman missionaries were sent. And what Patrick really did was recognize that, like, oh, these people already have the faith. They're just doing it differently because they didn't have this Roman structure.
Yeah.
And so there's this more informal tradition. And when the Romans continued to kind of expand, um, you're really only getting to the Northlands of Ireland and a little bit of Scotland that kind of still maintains some of that. And then when the Anglican Church formed, the Romans are no longer there, but the Anglicans were formed in the Roman model, and that actually kind of finished taking over the rest of it. And so you still had these little, like, mountain town, like, podunk churches that held on to the old way, right? But most of them had picked up this authoritarian thing.
Yeah.
So getting back to your question, George Fox, one of the biggest things I think he was rejecting was this authoritarian top-down structure.
Yeah.
He said that he went to talk to a bunch of different priest trying to find somebody who could speak to his condition, and he just couldn't find anyone. And so he ends up in a thin place praying and realizes, like, oh, there's only one who can speak to my tradition, my experience, and that's Christ Jesus. And so he then says, well, we don't need a mediator. Like, why do we have this priesthood and bishops and all of these things? Like, we should be able to encounter and talk to God directly, which is
Okay.
really just going back to this, you know, if he had visited some of the podunk country places in the northern area of England, he might have found one of these churches, but at this point there were so few of them that it's, you know, he would have been lucky to have stumbled upon one.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I don't know if you can remember to get back to your story where I totally interrupted you and sent us down a rabbit trail, but, go
You
ahead.
might you might have to remind me where we were.
Well, I asked the question. I'm trying to think myself. I asked the question about I got you were telling about the book written by, and now I just Matthew Fox. How did that fit with what you were saying? That's, I think, where we were when I threw us off by asking about relationship to George Fox.
Uh, I had just brought that up as an indication of the original blessing, and
Okay,
that he had spent some time with the Celts, and that's where he kind of got that idea
I
of the
gotcha.
original blessing.
Right. And so when you went to and got exposure to the Celts and this concept of original blessing, were you expecting that there?
No, it kind of became, like I said, I watched this. So I told you that I had kind of stuffed some of my own thoughts to be able to fit
Yes,
into the church.
exactly.
And that's why it was so appealing when I watched this abbot say heretical things, because it was like, I mean, I believe some weird things, but I don't believe that. So if he can be
Yeah.
here, I
W
could be here too.
you're
And, like, at the
teasing us
root of
here.
it,
What were some of the things that they were saying? Just curious. Do you
Oh, I
remember?
don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember what this particular abbot was saying, but I can remember. So this one stands out as something that a speaker came in and shared. He was talking about Adam and Eve and how God intended for them to sin. That the original plan was for them to sin because part of our development as human beings meant that we had to have gone through sin. It was a German theologian that came in and spoke to us, and I heard that and was like, "Oh my gosh, we're heretics."
Yeah,
I remember just being like, this is so wrong."
because everybody else wasn't standing up and saying, you know,
Yeah,
"Get behind me, Satan."
there was this willingness in the space among the Celtic Church to be with people who believe differently. There was no belief that because this person was speaking to the group and was considered an authority in that sense, that that also meant that the people in the room believed that. There was no expectation that there was common belief among the people.
Mhm.
Celts are hard-headed people who, you can't get them to believe what you want them to believe, and so, they tell tales actually about Saint Nicholas, and they say, everybody knows him as the gift giver or whatever, but what they don't know about his history, or what they often don't share at least, is that he beat somebody to death with his crozier because he disagreed with him on a theological point. Um, and I don't know how true that is, or if that's just some legend that they tell. But it highlights uh, the stubbornness among Celts.
Okay. But yet but yet here in the church, I assume you thought, "Wow, this is kind of refreshing given where you had been and how you had felt about where you had been."
Yeah, it was nice to not have to. It was nice to be in a church, to be able to be in fellowship with a group of people, and to be able to question and to be curious without worrying about people thinking that I was going to burn in hell.
Yeah.
Um, to there was a trust, and I've come to embody this in my work as a spiritual director. People often will come to me with they're going through deconstruction, trying to figure out, what do I still believe anymore? And
Yes.
so often they encounter in this world a worry for their soul when that happens.
Sure.
And in
They've
my
slid down the slippery slope.
yeah, in my experience, the first time I shared my whole story with my spiritual director, uh, she started referring to God in my context. She said, "God is the hound of heaven." And she said, "Wherever you went, wherever you ran off to
Yes.
when you would kind of go into these mysteries and questions that you would ask and doubts and those kind of things, the hound of heaven would still track you down." And I love that image.
Mhm.
And in my with my clients in spiritual direction, I believe that what I offer in that space often is the trust that the hound of heaven will find them. And so when they go off and they wonder, there's no panic for me. Like, even if it's way off what I think is the right trail, I still trust that the spirit will track them down. That if they're sitting in spiritual direction, that they're still seekers. And that's
Yes.
all God wants from us. If we're seekers, if we're still open to learning, if we're still open to thinking, asking the questions, then God will be there. God will help us find our way.
I
And
guess
so,
that what I want to get your opinion on this, that concept of the hound of heaven, because I've had multiple guests on here that basically have described the same thing. They'll say things like, "Grew up with this, all of a sudden it didn't seem to answer the big questions in life that I had. I began to question incongruities within the church I was at. Often those come about because of certain world events or whatever the case may be." And of course, they're afraid to pull away from that, and they go through a period, and the deconstruction, I guess, is the word you use for that. And but then when they come out of that, they realized that maybe God was speaking to them more during the deconstruction than maybe they had at any point in their life. It kind of sounds like heresy
Right?
because they weren't getting up in the morning and reading the Bible for an hour. And instead, they were maybe even saying, the church over here, man, I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is we often don't know it as Christians. Among Christians, we don't talk about the the roots that we come from often enough. But in Jewish tradition, Jesus was a Jew, right?
Mhm.
And when you look at the way that they looked at scripture, it was vastly different than what we do. They have this I believe it's called the no, the Targums, I forget what it's called. It'll probably come to me, but at the moment I'm forgetting.
Okay, that's fine.
But there's this book that is kind of their it's like their companion scripture. So they have the scripture like they would read Deuteronomy just like we would, but
Mhm.
there's this companion it's like a commentary, but it's more than a commentary. And the way that this traditional writing goes is there's a verse and there's a rabbi who says something about the verse. And then another rabbi comments on what that rabbi said. And on, one rabbi commenting on one after another. And when you look at these comments that go back and forth that are recorded in this companion book, they're arguing with each other. It's not always building on, let me build on this idea. Sometimes they're like, this guy was crazy. He wrote this thing and this is wrong.
Right,
And there was this appreciation for debate over the scripture because there was this belief that in wrestling with it, like Jacob wrestled with God, that we can encounter God through the wrestling itself. And somewhere along the way, Christians started to really hold up surety of faith. The gospel became more about what you believe.
right.
You have to believe rightly. Orthodoxy even means, to
Yes,
have orthodox thought means to have right thought, correct.
yes. Be correct.
Yeah. And the tradition that we come from, the tradition that Jesus would have grown up in, and that all the writings of the New Testament, even these people grew up in a faith where they were able to wrestle and argue with their faith. And so when people go through the stage of faith, not everybody does this. There's this book called The Critical Journey that kind of maps out like a faith journey that people go on.
Mhm.
And stage one is kind of that initial, like, I encounter God. I'm very excited about everything that I'm learning. I just absorb it like a sponge.
Right,
What they call stage two faith is I start to practice some of it. Stage three faith is I've kind of embodied it. And maybe I begin to take a leadership role. And it's completely normal for some people to stop at stage three and never go any further. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong. These aren't hierarchies. It's not
right.
better because you go to another one. But the authors, Gulig and Hedberg, describe two other stages, stage four and stage five. And stage four faith is kind of this deconstruction period where somebody starts to say, well, okay, I appreciate that I've learned this thing, or maybe they don't even appreciate. Maybe they've rejected it enough that I hate this thing that I've learned, this tradition that I grew up
Right.
in. But what happens in that phase is they start to individuate their faith. What does this mean for me particularly? And so it's a turn inward, and the church as a whole struggles to watch people turn inward because it
Yes.
looks like a turn inward is a selfish turn, and that is not Christian. But what happens is if you let somebody go through this inward turn to individuate their faith, stage five faith, they turn back outward, but they do it differently. A stage five and a stage three faith can look very similar on the surface because they're both outward servants.
Yes.
But stage three is doing what needs to be done in order to keep the organization working and flowing the way that it always has. While stage five is saying, how has God gifted me in particular? Because I've spent enough time inward, turning inward, individuating my faith to know how God made me. And now I can practice serving in a way that is aligned with how God has made me. And so
Yes.
they can be much more effective servants in stage 5, but we have to give them time to turn inward, to deconstruct,
Yes.
uh, and to individuate, and we don't like that. It scares us.
Yes. Yeah, I can totally identify with that. For me, it took a major life event to cause me to turn inward. Health issue that for the first time I faced my mortality and like, this is no longer a game. This is for real. And that was enough to do that. Although the faith tradition that I had been in for many years, that's a scary process.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this fear that people will walk away from the church if you let
Yes.
them go through that process. And it's
Yeah.
not unfounded. People do. I think there's more to that, but
Yeah,
um,
I'd be curious to get your idea because I've had several guests on here so far, and they tend to be in these examples, and I'm generalizing, 30-some-year-olds who become disenfranchised with the church. Somehow they began to really question the belief system and the consistency of it. And their reaction has been to just walk away from it and maybe even badmouth it. But in that process, what I see in their lives as they tell their story is they've been growing spiritually, but they're not connected to a church, or they may be connected to other individuals who feel the same way, but it's not church. What do you have to say? Do you run across that also? And I mean, obviously the numbers point to that there's so many people walking away from organized religion.
yeah, I think that one of the things that's happening, so Hedberg and Gulag in Critical Journey, they specifically call out, they say the stage 4 or 5 faith that I'm talking about, that the church is really, really bad at working with that. And it's interesting. It's not just stage 4 when they're deconstructing. It's also stage 5 when somebody knows what their gift is, because then they come into the church and they're like, "Hey, I want to do this thing," and the church is like, "We don't have that thing, but we do need somebody in the children's ministry. Will you work
Right.
there?" And it's like,
Yeah.
"No, that's not what I'm called to do." And so the church has traditionally done very poorly at working with it. And I think what happens then is people who are going through this stage of individuating, they look at the church that they've grown up in and they see no models of what does it look like to be a deconstructing person in community with these people. There's no example. And without an example of it, they assume that they have to leave.
Yes.
And so I think we're not lifting up the examples. An example of how maybe this was done differently in the past is think about the mystics. Many of the mystics are people who went through some deconstruction and they came onto the other side and were then giving in ways that the church didn't recognize. So they kind of
Yes.
gave of themselves on the side, but they were still lifted up in some ways. People shared their text and things like that. When I encounter people who grew up in more fundamentalist evangelical churches, there is so little exposure to the history of church that when I bring up concepts like original blessing or when I talk about the mystics, they don't even know that they exist.
Yeah.
So it's not even that they're not being lifted up. It's like they've been completely hidden and ostracized to the side. And so getting back to your question, I think that what's happening is we have pushed those who live on the margins of faith so far outside of it that those who are going through deconstruction don't even believe or know that there is anything out them for them after stage 3.
Yes.
And when they're so uncomfortable in stage 3, it means that there's no place left for them. And so they call themselves spiritual but not religious.
Yes.
Now, I do think that there's a different thing that happens, and this is what I was getting at with that sometimes people do fall away from the church in a different way. I think spiritual but not religious are people who probably would have stayed with the church if they were given a model. But there is another journey that some people will go on where they hit this stage 4, and at the end of stage 4 there's this place called the wall, that Gulag and Hedberg, and oftentimes we run into the wall over and over again. It's like we hit our heads against it. It's usually this place of deep grieving where we have to reconcile ourselves with these differences, and how do I really deconstruct everything at the core. And sometimes when we beat our heads up against that for too long, and nobody helps us through that journey, if nobody's around that can help,
Hmm.
or if we're just, for whatever reason, we don't have the right experiences that happen, and we're not able to navigate that on our own, because it's not always with the help of somebody. Sometimes we navigate it and get through it.
Yeah.
But if we can't successfully navigate past the wall, sometimes what people will do is regress and just go back to a more comfortable stage. Um, and that will happen repetitively, but sometimes they just go all the way back and they'll throw faith out entirely. And so I think that there's a big difference between somebody who would say after that journey, I'm spiritual but not religious. These are the people that we lost because we've not structured our churches well. These are
Hmm.
the people that we've lost because we don't have the models. But then there are people who completely reject faith altogether and just engage in secular life without believing that there's anything more.
Yeah.
And that's harder to recover. Um,
Yes.
there's there's not still that seeker connection where they can connect to the light within in the same way.
Yeah.
And talking to them, you can feel a difference. There's less resonance and help there.
Yeah. What would you have to say to a listener today that is in that deconstructive phase of their faith journey, but they probably don't even know there anything that there's a name for it? What's your advice, your encouragement to those individuals?
You're not alone. You're not alone. There is a there is a long, deep history among our faith tradition and others. It doesn't even have to be within our own tradition, but there's there's a long history of people who are going through exactly what you're going through, and it has been sheltered and hidden from people because it's uncomfortable. Um, but you're not alone. You're not alone now. You're not alone historically. You're not alone in orthodoxy. Like in various periods of time, that way of thinking was the orthodox way of thinking. And so to think that you're an outsider or that you don't belong, is only because of what you've been exposed to, not because of what is actually out there in our faith tradition. There's so much richness,
Yeah.
so much to
And
mine.
I can see how that message would be very encouraging. Any thoughts on, as now our listener is encouraged with that first steps from where they're at, the confusion and the fog that they're in?
Yeah. Um, Talk to somebody who listens well. Um, I work as a spiritual director, and so I believe in the power of listening. It is um, transformational. Like you can, we live it every day in our own lives, right? Like it can be as simple as I'm telling a story and I don't realize where I'm going, or I've forgotten, or I didn't hear something, and I sit there in the silence for a moment with this person who's willing to sit there, and suddenly, well, I get it. I remember, or I suddenly had a realization. It can be as little as that to sometimes when you are in listening spaces, you have much more transformational experiences where everything clicks together. What Esther Meek called subsidiary focal integration. It's this big word that
Hmm.
he uses to say, like, if you're outside and you're looking at the leaves beside you and you're just kind of noticing the pattern. You're like, this is nice. And you're looking, and then all of a sudden, rattlesnake. It's been
Hmm.
there at your foot the whole time, but you suddenly, the subsidiary, these side details, focal, become your focal point, and you suddenly have everything integrated together. And so sometimes in these listening spaces, we can have a subsidiary focal integration moment where everything comes together. And so I would encourage being in a space, whether it's with a spiritual director or just a good friend who really knows how to listen without their own agenda. Be in those spaces and talk it out. We have so few spaces where we're really allowed to talk about our spiritual experiences. And so those spaces get unlistened to. And when they get unlistened to, they are never integrated into our fuller story.
Yeah. And I would guess, as I'm thinking, putting myself in the shoes of that listener, there has to come at some point the recognition that that light is within them, that they can trust that. Because maybe they've been taught all their life you can't trust your own instincts, and that's hard. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you taking this time. I'm sorry I don't have that free trip to Ireland for you.
One day.
One day, yeah, right. I like to ask a kind of a closing question for our guests. It's pretty short, straightforward. Well, I shouldn't say straightforward. It's a short question anyway. How do you want to be remembered? Maybe on your tombstone, maybe your obituary, or as friends talk about, do you hear what happened to Chris?
It's likely influenced by my current studies. So I'm working on my PhD, and I'm studying listening, and in particular, I'm studying how listening impacts our knowing, how we come to know through the listening space. And so being known as somebody who listened people into knowing would be, at least at this moment in my life, would be a beautiful way to be remembered.
That's great. Thank you very much for being with us.
It was good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
There's a light that was shining when the world began, light and heart that is shining in a woman and man. There's a light that is shining in us, in them too. It's the light that is shining, friend, in me and in you. Walk in the light wherever you may be. Walk in the light wherever you may be. In my old leather breeches and my shaggy locks, I am walking in the glory of the light, said Fox. With a book and a steeple and a bell and a key, they will bind it forever, but they can't, said he. Oh, the book, it will perish and the steeple will fall, but the light will be shining at the end of it all. Walk in the light wherever you may be. Walk in the light wherever you may be. In my old leather breeches and my shaggy locks, I am walking in the glory of the light, said Fox. If we give you a pistol, will you fight for the Lord? But you can't kill the devil with a gun or a sword. Will you swear on the Bible? I will not, said he, for the truth is more holy than the book to me. Walk in the light wherever you may be. Walk in the light wherever you may be. In my old leather breeches and my shaggy locks, I am walking in the glory of the light, said Fox. There's an ocean of darkness, and I drown in the night, till I come through the darkness to the ocean of light. You can lock me in prison, but the light will be free, and I walk in the glory of said he, walk in the light wherever you may be. Walk in the light wherever you may be. In your old leather breeches and your shaggy locks, you enlightened and changed the world, George Fox.